If you have a look at what types of governments exist today, there are very broadly speaking 3 types. Democracies, like the type you are likely watching this video from, where the public to varying degree chooses their leader via a system of one person gets one vote. Autocracies, where one individual, whether through military takeover, dynastic cycling, or state erosions of institutions, rules but where elections either don't happen or are neither free nor fair. Or theocracies, where a religious government implements their vision of what some sort of ancient text prescribes to be the correct form of government, but where people don't vote for their elected leader, as the mandate of God or gods is the legitimacy used to justify their ruling. But this has not always been the case. Throughout history, we've seen a number of interesting and creative structures of government. Most of these are, in my opinion, no longer fit for serving the needs of a modern society. Take a gerontocracy, for instance, a form of government where the elders are the ones in control, claiming their legitimacy from their age and experience. It would be silly to run a modern government based on that premise today. Thank God that would never happen. But there's one of these ancient systems of government that I believe is worth having another look at: a lottocracy. A lottocracy, as the name implies, is a system of government where government representatives of varying levels are chosen by lot, or in other words, completely randomly. Now, before you violently unsubscribe and try to get me interned into a psychiatric institute, I'd like to go through some of the examples of lottocratic or almost lottocratic systems from history. I'm then going to look at both the cons and then the pros, and yes, in that order, of such a system, and I'll try to make the case as to why this could be an interesting system to try to, at least partially, integrate into our modern democracies. And finally, I'll take a look at some modern examples of lottocracy-inspired systems, already in place or currently being trialed. In ancient Athens, sortition was used to select citizens for many government positions, including the Athenian Council of 500. This helped ensure a more representative and less corrupt government. However, elections were still used for some key positions, like military commanders. In the city-states of Lombardy and Venice from roughly the 12th till the 18th century, they used a system called brevia, where men were randomly chosen to elect members of the council. This helped reduce corruption and intrigue within the governing bodies. In Venice, lot was used to select members of committees that nominated candidates for the Great Council, though top magistracies remained controlled by elite families. The Republic of Florence in the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, so the 14th to 16th century, used a lottery system for choosing members of the government. The names of eligible citizens were drawn by lot to fill positions in the Signoria, the main executive body, and certain other magistracies. The Republic of San Marino, one of the world's oldest republics, has historically used lotteries as part of its government selection process. Although the practice has evolved, early forms of its government include lottery elements to choose members of the council. Certain cantons in Switzerland between 1640 and 1837 used sortition to avoid corruption and choose mayoral candidates. These ideas were also often popular amongst philosophers. Aristotle famously thought of democratic elections as aristocratic. In the Renaissance, Montesquieu wrote a famous book called The Spirit of Laws, in which he argues that a mixed sortition system is the most democratic form of governance. Later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, another prominent Enlightenment-era thinker, would agree with him. Now, one important distinction to make is that all of these systems use the concept of citizenship a bit differently than we do today. Oftentimes, just a small portion of the total population were eligible, and more often than not, this was only land-owning men. But nonetheless, in an environment which was overwhelmingly dominated by monarchies, principalities, or other broadly authoritarian regimes, having non-nobility in decision-making roles was a huge step forward. Now, let's take a look at some of the reasons why this might not be a great idea. Firstly, the average person is pretty stupid. How can we be sure that the guy with a "fuck you Greta" sign on his modified extra-loud Fiat Abarth is even remotely qualified to make a decision about fundamentally complex and sensitive topics like geopolitical relations, incentive structures through tax planning, or is even willing to solve broadened, consensus-based problems instead of just screaming the loudest? Although education standards have been rising throughout the world, it is unlikely that a person who is not interested in a topic would have much knowledge about it. Think about it. How many of you, dear viewers, know enough about the tax code for truck beds to make some sort of decision about it? What about the geopolitical situation in Tajikistan? Or the rare earth mineral enrichment process? If you don't know about the topic, how can you make a decision about it affecting everyone in the country? In addition, the fact that the average person has pretty poor operational cybersecurity is of concern. What if a foreign government hacks your OnlyFans account and uses your love of catgirl feet pics to blackmail you? Elected politicians are often given courses on how to reduce exposure to bad agents like like this. But your average Facebook grandma, whose password is 12345 and regularly comments "so true" under AI photos of children pointing at Jesus or whatever, might not be the savviest leader. Next, there's a lack of accountability. Given that an elected official has to worry about getting re-elected, it's likely that they want to perform well, or at least well enough to get re-elected. Our elected officials are accountable to the general public. A person who got chosen randomly may be far less motivated to actually perform and put in the hours necessary to actually make those changes. What if they quit a couple weeks into their term? Would we be forced to choose the next random leader? Next, there's questions of legitimacy and public trust. A representative leader can at the very least claim that they were elected by a wide base of people. They justify their legitimacy by saying that most people in the country wanted them to be the leader. A random person does not have that. This lack of legitimacy may undermine public trust in the government and encourage more breakaway notions, rebellious members of parliament, or foster the creation of shadow governments. Finally, there are practical implementation problems. Actually organizing a lottocracy would require incredible transparency. It is a complex operation that would require numerous different bodies ensuring fairness and inclusivity in the random selection process. This is very difficult to achieve at a large enough scale to be effectively implemented in government. Now let's look at some of the advantages. It's cheap. In the US alone, in 2022, a non-presidential election year, $8.9 billion was spent on elections. This includes both the administrative cost of actually having people vote, those votes counted and verified, and all the infrastructure needed to allow people to vote, as well as money spent on advertising and campaigns. In 2020, a presidential election year, the total cost of running the election was $16.4 billion. For context, NASA's budget in 2024 was $24 billion. Think of what NASA could do with an extra 60% boost in its budget. A random process would not be completely free. It would certainly be operationally cheaper than going to vote, and all the money that is spent on election posters and one-time use advertising is not particularly productive. They are not machines or infrastructure which can be used to grow the economy. They are much more efficient uses of capital than that. Next, it reduces corruption. The money for financing election campaigns does not come out of thin air. Wealthy donors, special interest groups, and foreign governments through shady means all try to get influence from their preferred candidate. And once in office, these companies and individuals expect certain kickbacks in the form of lessened regulations, implementation of laws, or geopolitical goals. It also forces companies to be more considerate. Take the example of Ryanair, a European discount airline, charging a largely unjustifiable late check-in fee for people who did not check in online, or just whatever the hell this crap is. Right now, Ryanair can get away with this sort of behavior because 1, they know exactly who to lobby to get these kinds of rules accepted, and 2, quite frankly, our elected officials don't fly Ryanair. But if just about anyone could be leading the country, their strategy of providing a shittier than expected service might have to change. I would have a personal vendetta against Ryanair as a leader of a country, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Perhaps their services would improve under a lottocracy, as not to potentially screw themselves over for the next leader. Next, it improves class and demographic representation. At the moment, roughly 66% of senators and just under 50% of House members are millionaires in the United States. In the population at large, only 8.8% of people are millionaires. Do you think those millionaires understand the struggles of a person who has to choose between paying rent and paying for food has? Or to be less extreme, someone whose electricity costs have shot up by 100% in the last couple of years and now can no longer afford the same small-scale luxuries like a nice dinner out once a month? It also improves demographic representation. To take a non-US example, India's parliament has 543 seats filled at the moment, of which 78 are women. In a country where 50% of people are women, having only 14% of seats filled by women is not exactly representative. Choosing the members of parliament at random would pretty much guarantee a much fairer representation. Next, it reduces political polarization. By removing elections and political parties from the process, individuals who are chosen for office aren't going to have to rile up voters with some sort of end-of-the-world fear-mongering techniques that we so often see employed by populist parties.
If Harris wins this election, you will quickly have a crash like in 1929. We could end up in World War III. The suburbs will be overrun.
The officials could then actually focus on consensus building and deliberating in order to find popular solutions to problems. Simultaneously, officials won't have to worry about getting re-elected or their political careers in general. So they might be inclined to make changes happen quickly rather than dragging out popular promises in order to get re-elected. And they won't have to worry about schmoozing up to donors with unpopular promises just because they need the money for re-election campaigns. Finally, it would improve the focus on deliberation. I'm always critical of arguments which invoke human nature, but I believe in this case it's justified. Early humans spent most of our times in groups of roughly 50 to 150 members. Here, decisions could be effectively taken democratically because our large brains enable us to actually communicate with each other. This is something which we cannot do in a society of millions. Instead, choosing some random individuals from society to represent us in that debate, while being informed by experts in the relevant fields, could be a useful tool to make sure that all voices are heard, instead of just having the most charismatic or most well-connected ones among us representing us. It makes more sense to use a true average of society. Marketing studies don't only pick attractive models to see their new vacuum cleaners work. They need a broad segment of society with different needs, from your 75-year-old grandmother with arthritis all the way to your stoned college students who is too high to read the instruction manual. By getting a broad set of opinions, they're able to improve their product and make sure it works for as many people as possible. Why not do the same for our system of government? We've looked at some pros and cons of lottocracies, and we've even seen how some ancient societies use them. But now I want to take a look at modern lottocratic systems. You might be thinking, well, hang on, no country in the world chooses its leader at random. And yes, you would be right. There is no country which uses a lottocracy as its official form of government. But many countries have experimented with lottocracy-inspired approaches. These are called citizen assemblies. In 2016, the Irish Citizens' Assembly, composed of 99 randomly selected citizens, was convened to discuss key issues such as abortion and climate change. Their recommendations led to significant policy changes, including the 2018 referendum that resulted in the legalization of abortion. Following the 2008 financial crisis, Iceland convened a constitutional assembly in 2010, where 1/3 of the participants were chosen randomly from the National Registry to help draft a new constitution. In 2004, British Columbia in Canada used a randomly selected group of 160 citizens to review and propose changes to the province's electoral system. Although their recommendations for single transferable vote systems was not adopted, the process was seen as a successful experiment in democratic innovation. In the United States, the state of Oregon has implemented the Citizens Initiative review process since 2010. Randomly selected citizens are brought together to review and evaluate ballot measures, providing voters with informed assessments in the voter pamphlets. In 2011, Belgium experimented with the G1000 initiative, where 1,000 randomly selected citizens were invited to participate in a deliberative process on important national issues. This initiative aimed to bridge the gap between politicians and citizens. In 2019, the city of Paris established a permanent citizens' assembly composed of randomly selected residents to discuss and provide input on various municipal issues, including climate action. And in 2019, the German-speaking community of Belgium, Ostbelgien, created a permanent citizens' council. Members are selected by lot to serve and advise the regional parliament on a variety of political issues. If these kinds of assemblies are possible at a smaller scale, like we have seen, I wonder what's holding us back from implementing this at a larger scale. Admittedly, I don't think a full-on lottocracy is the correct system of government for our countries at the moment, but I believe there's an argument to be had to have at least part of our parliament selected this way. The way I see it, many of the problems we face in our society today are collective action problems: how to fight climate change, how to reduce income inequality, and how to achieve true equality and justice. Representative democracies are a good first step in addressing these problems, but ultimately they fail when they start overwhelmingly representing the elite in society. I believe that having a portion, say 30% of the seats in parliament, reserved for the so-called everyman, we might be able to achieve a more representative system. Alternatively, it could be possible to complicate our already complex political system by perhaps adding a secondary, or in some cases, tertiary branch to our legislative bodies: a parliament, a senate, and an assembly, which all have to approve of a law before it becomes law, where the assembly would be made up of some arbitrary number of randomly selected people who, with the help of leading experts in relevant fields, would be given time to deliberate the implication of laws. I believe this may help put a stop to preferential treatment for the wealthiest citizens and corporations. Historical examples have shown us that it is definitely possible to incorporate elements of lottocracy in our government, and contemporary examples show us the benefits of deliberation amongst groups of citizens to address complex social issues like abortion. Nonetheless, these assemblies come with a range of challenges. How do we make sure that people selected are motivated to do their jobs? How can we guarantee that they are held accountable to the same standards as our other politicians and actually show up to work? And how can we design a transparent and fair system that can avoid the shenaniganry that we often see happening in elections? If we can find answers to these questions, I'm sure that we can move on from our current representative democracies. We could enjoy all the advantages that come with this, from simple cost savings and improvements in class and demographic representation, all the way to reduction in corruption and political polarization. Ultimately, democracy is a process, and one which we have by no means finished. We should remain open-minded and constantly think of new ways that we can improve our political process. After all, the structures we use today have been in place for roughly 300 years, and expecting such structures to remain relevant in an age of increased connectivity and instant information access is absurd. Isn't it time we updated our systems? As always, if you enjoyed the video, a like, comment, and subscription would go a very long way, but only if you think I deserved it. Stay safe and stay curious.